By your correct name or refer
Thank
to
you,
her
Mr.
as
Speaker.
her.
And the Minister will stand up in this House, talk tough and say it's not her problem, it's the private prison company's responsibility, because that's what this is all about. It's about abdicating the state's responsibility. Maintaining law and order is one of the most fundamental responsibilities of any government, and this government thinks that it should be contracted out. They think that the maintenance of law and order, this National Act Māori Party government, think that maintaining law and order is a government responsibility that can be contracted out to the for-profit sector. What's coming next? Will the police be next? Are they going to privatise the police force as well? Are they going to privatise the defence force? Perhaps will the Minister privatise the police force? Perhaps that would help her avoid the little issue she's got in Upper Hutt, where she's trying to do away with the Upper Hutt police force by merging them with the Lower Hutt police force, which she's very quiet on. Now, private prisons are only accountable to their shareholders. Public prisons are morally and fiscally accountable to taxpayers, and that is the way it should be. In their quest to turn a buck, the private prison companies would be encouraged to cut costs and to cut corners. They would be cutting costs and cutting corners and serving food that's past its use-by date to the prisoners. And I can tell the House right now that that's a bad thing, and that the people of Rimutaka would not support the privatisation of their prison. The people of Rimutaka would not support the privatisation of their prison. And I challenge Paul Quinn to come out to the Hutt Valley and to tell them, he might find it on a map, and to come out and tell them why he thinks it's acceptable to privatise the management of the Rimutaka prison, because he wouldn't get a single vote in Rimutaka if he came out and said that he thought that privatising the Rimutaka prison was a good idea. Private prisons would encourage operators of prisons to cut costs and to cut corners. We'd see lower staff to inmate ratios, much less of a focus on rehabilitation, cuts in staff pay and conditions, and of course cuts in the level of staff qualification and in staff training, because ultimately if it's about a profit, they'll cut costs wherever they possibly can. Overseas experience in Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, and I know that the government don't like evidence from overseas, they don't like any evidence at all, but it's showing huge flaws in private prison systems, ranging from bribery, corruption, increased violence and increased drug abuse, avoidable suicides, and this government don't want to hear about any of that. This government don't want to hear about any of that. Private prisons would create huge conflicts of interests. Where will be the incentive for prisoner rehabilitation when the company that incarcerates them has a financial incentive to keep them in there for as long as possible? As David Parker said, prison management plays quite a significant role in determining who gets release, who gets parole and so forth. And yet we are now going to try and create a profit-making incentive for those prisons to keep people in there as long as they possibly can. Surely our goal, and surely what we really should be talking about, is how we reduce the number of people that we lock up. We should be focusing on the fence at the top of the cliff rather than putting more privatised prison buses at the bottom of the cliff, which is what this government seems interested in doing. We know that there is no evidence that private prisons can be run more cheaply or more effectively. In the Auckland Central Remand Prison, the cost per inmate may have been slightly less, but that's because they didn't have the larger costs associated with maximum security. And also they didn't have the costs associated with maximum security, and they had fewer prison officers per inmate, and they paid them less than the Department of Corrections paid them and other prisons all across the country. They provided a reduced service. They didn't admit prisoners after 6:30 p.m. at night. So if you're trying to look to having a prisoner admitted after 6:30 at night, don't go to any of the private prisons. Labor passed legislation in 2004 making jails solely the job of the Crown, and we stand by that legislation.
Point of order.
Speaker, but you have already on one occasion raised the issue of interjections being out of order unless they're rare, reasonable and relevant. And what we've had is a continual barrage from the other side of the House, which is not permitted in the debating chamber, and the members should come to order. If they want to make a speech, then they should take the opportunity next time and do so.
Thank you for
and
those
it's covered
comments.
by Speaker Stratham, 1923.
Thank you for those comments.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Labor believes that prisons are a public service. National does not. Labor believes in public services. We're opposed to privatisation, and we will not support this bill.